Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Discomfort-Zone podcast. Thank you so much for being here, those in chat, Swoop and Rondon, anyone who's listening later. My name is Olev and I just want to start off by saying that the views and opinions presented in this show are my own and don't represent MSP Waves or anyone else for that matter. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Now, there's a lot I want to get through today. Can you hear me okay? Is the audio okay? If there's any problems, just let me know. There are two major things that are going on, one on a global scale and one in the STEAM sphere. And so I'm just want to start out by saying I'm not going to be talking about the hard fork for those who don't know or anything. I'm no expert and I'm still learning about it myself, so I'm going to stay away from that topic. I am, however, if I get a chance at the end and we have enough time, I want to say a few things about the coronavirus and I think specifically how it pertains to what this episode is about. So that's about the general overview, and this episode, for those who've been following, for those who haven't, is a continuation of the 5 methodologies underlying the ecoVillage model. And so the last couple of episodes, we've spoken about permaculture a little bit, we've spoken about food forests, and this episode is about the Earthship, the Earthship model, I should say. Now, for those of you out there who are STEAMians, you might have heard about the Earthship, you probably have heard of it from ecoAlex, who has actually been living in an Earthship for the past 14 years and is much more of an expert than I on the subject. And so I am not here to represent, any kind of official opinion. If you want to learn more about the Earthship model, how to do it, where they've been done, there are lots of resources that I'm sure you can find on the subject. As for me, I'm going to talk about it as part of the ecoVillage model. Oh, Swoop, you're building one. Wow, that's amazing. I'm really looking forward to start building our Earthship. We decided we want an Earthship a good few years ago, and we've been waiting for the chance to start working on it. So it's going to be a while yet, but that's very exciting, Swoop. Congratulations. So I'm going to start off with a general description just for those who've never heard of it, who don't know, don't have any idea what it is. What is the Earthship? Well, in around the 1970s, there was an American architect called Michael Reynolds who wanted to design a new type of home, a new type of building that could function much better as a home for human beings. And so I won't go through his entire process, and it's something that he's still developing. It's a continuing work and work of improvement. And he had a few basic ideas about what this house, what this home needed to do. And so the name really gives a certain idea of why he chose it, an Earthship, because of most of the material that it's made of, which is sand, earth. And obviously of the planet Earth, this is the ship with which people are supposed to, travel on this Earth. And this ship is less like the ship on the sea that we know and more like a spaceship, which is a vessel that can sustain the life of its occupants, no matter the surroundings, as it were. And so that was his idea going into it. And he's went through various sort of challenges in trying to find what building materials, what kind of design, or how the structure could function most effectively and efficiently. And so he came up with actually the model that we have spoken about here on this podcast, which is the 5 sort of needs of survival, which are food, water, energy, which is both for heating and cooling the house, and obviously electricity, waste management, and there's actually one other, which is the sort of use of materials has to be materials that are accessible to anyone. And so that was a very important part for Michael Reynolds. This building couldn't be in need of sustaining itself through very rare materials or through tools that common people won't have access to. He wanted this idea to be available for the whole world, anyone, anywhere. And so he basically has been developing this idea for a long, long time, and it's gone through quite a few evolutions. But at the moment, the way I understand, oh, is there a problem with the stream? Hang on. Can you hear me okay still? I'm going to carry on in case you can hear okay. If there are any problems, then let me know in chat. And so today, the model that he talks about, that Mike Reynolds talks about, there's a few models basically. Okay. So if it, I see. If there are any problems, then yeah, let me know, because I'm actually listening to this here. So, okay. Excellent. As long as it's working now, I'll continue. And so there's a few models that he basically developed, but the one that is he most, as it were, recommends is known as the global model. And so the global model is supposed to be adaptable to be anywhere in the world in any kind of climate and still be able to function properly. And so by function properly, we're talking about sustaining all of those needs that we've mentioned. So I'm going to very quickly go over what the global model contains basically. And this is generally true of all Earthships, but with other models you can increase on them, you can add different rooms, depending on the climate you can do different designs, 2 stories, etc. But the global model is sort of the most basic model that then you can adapt. And so it contains basically the front of the house is a greenhouse with large windows and a lot of space to plant any kind of plants, and there's enough room to have food production for the family, since it's a greenhouse. So even in cold climates or in hot climates, there are ways of cooling it with air cooling tubes. All of the heating and cooling of the Earthship is done passively, meaning without needing extra energy. Through the design of the house, the angle of the windows is actually designed so that in the summer sun, when the Earth is very, very high on the sky, it hits the angle of the windows and reflects most of the heat outwards. And in the winter, when the sun is much lower, it comes to the windows at close to a 90-degree angle and lets a lot more of the heat in. And there are various other things, I won't go into it, but all of the heating and cooling is done passively. There's actually no need, there shouldn't be any need for any external energy. In terms of the waste management, the Earthship reuses its water again and again throughout all of the different systems. And so in the beginning of the development of the model, they were looking at toilets that weren't based on water. Compost toilets, they were experimenting with solar toilets. They had all these different things that they were trying out. And they discovered, as they wanted to be something that could be available to everyone and to common people and wouldn't be something that was sort of shunned as this weird model, people seemed to have a real problem with any toilet that wasn't water-based. And so they made a decision, Mike Reynolds made a decision to find a way to install a water-based toilet that would still be able to function on rainwater alone, and incorporate it into the Earthship. And so they eventually managed to do it, and it's a very impressive system. In fact, I'm actually going to upload a link here to anyone who wants to see the systems in it. This is a link for the survival model, which is a sort of minimized version of the global model, and it's meant to be a model that can be set up very, very quickly in times of emergency, in case people actually have a need. So they've actually, the Earthship company has traveled around the world to places that have been through crises and different natural disasters, and I've actually gone and helped set up these survival Earthships. And so I'm going to add that to the chat now once I get there. On top of all of this, there's the different systems that are used to reuse and filtrate the water. And so every Earthship has a water management module, which is a very, I mean, it's not overly complex, but it's a sophisticated system that is used to manage all of the water in the Earthship, from rainwater catchment to pressurizing it, distributing it to different areas, water heater, and after it goes through the cycle, the grey water cycle, and is filtered by plants, it eventually actually goes to the toilet to be used as black water, and that gets sent to often a septic tank. That's the common thing, because that's usually what's within regulation. And so I'm going to expand on all of that just a little bit as we go. But for now, I'd like to carry on to talk about something very special about the Earthship. And so what happened was that Mike Reynolds was looking at these problems in the world and what was going on with people basically having a difficult time, some people not having a home, not having enough food. And he wanted to offer a solution that could really be affordable and available to everyone. And so if you've heard this show before, you might notice that there are a lot of similarities between the ecoVillage model and what we're trying to do, and the Earthship model and what Mike Reynolds is doing. And that is that there's this term that we've introduced, disrupting the cost of living. And it seems that the Earthship model is designed specifically to do that. So with an affordable cost, because well, let's talk about the building materials, a little bit of the Earthship and how it's built. It's very important for Mike Reynolds that people who buy an Earthship take an active part in building it. And this is obviously for a number of reasons. Number one, to actually involve people in the building of their house, to make them a part of it. I can see someone can't hear anything. Is that everyone else, or I'm sorry that there's so many problems today. I don't know what it is. I think everything on my end seems okay. I will carry on until I'm told that you can't hear me. And so, first of all, it's to help them connect with the home, to understand from the inside how it works, how it's built from the ground up. Oh, good, excellent. And it's very important for him that the people take an active process and feel like this house is not just some machine that they bought at the store, but it's actually a part of them, a part of their life, tailored specifically to who they are and what their needs are, etc., etc. And so this is really a different way of thinking about housing, different way of thinking about occupants. Usually when we buy a house or when we move in, usually when we move into a house, it's a ready-made house. We get to decorate it inside sometimes, but it's never actually built to our personal needs. Whereas all the Earthships are designed by the buyers along with Mike Reynolds, and it becomes a very customary thing. And so I think in light of that, it's important to make a very quick distinction here, which is quite crucial, I think, in order to set things straight. When I say Earthship, I'm actually talking about what's known as Earthship Biotecture, which is a registered copyright name. And so a lot of the time, many people can use the word Earthship when they mean various different things. It could be any kind of building with tires, basically. It could be any kind of shape that's half buried in the ground. These are all aspects of the Earthship that are very famous. But in order for something to actually sort of legally be an Earthship from Biotecture, it has to have the, signed approval of working through them. Now, whether this is a good thing or not a good thing, I'm not going to get into the argument. I'm not here to decide about the legal battle, but it's important to note that just because you see a building with tires, it doesn't automatically make it an Earthship, or what I'm talking about as an Earthship. I don't mind what people want to call it, but when I refer to the Earthship in the ecoVillage model context as one of the 5 pillars, it's specifically this building that has all of these things encapsulated into it. And so those 2 things are really crucial and key parts of the Earthship, obviously. So every Earthship is built mainly, the building material is tires, old tires that are discarded, that we know can take up loads of places in landfills and don't really do much else. But when you look at the state around, Mike Reynolds was really trying to find a material that would be accessible to everyone in the world. And it seems that in all corners of the world, tires have found their way one way or another. And there isn't really much to do with them. So because of this, he found that the tire and the way it's structured was actually a perfect building block. And when he was asked later, he was asked recently a few years ago whether, I think he actually answered, but whether if he could change the building material to something else, if he would, he said he actually wouldn't, because the tire has turned out to be what just started as finding a reuse for a material that we have too much of and we don't know what to do with. What started out as just recycling has actually become a very useful asset with many, many different advantages that he didn't actually know before. And so tires can hold a lot of pressure. They're designed to be very stable in that state. And what you do is you take the tire and you pound sand into them with a sledgehammer. And you pound it a lot until it's really built up that pressure. And these tires go on top of each other. They're held together with a wire mesh and various building adhesives to hold it all in place. And that becomes the main structure. So these walls of tires and earth are very, very thick. They go very, very deep. Sometimes they're even half buried into the side of a mountain. And what this does is it creates a huge earth beam around most of the house. Basically, the front side of the house, which is facing south, is almost completely exposed with this big greenhouse window. And then the sides and the back of the house are these very, very thick, this very thick earth beam going around. And that earth is actually in charge of a lot of the passive heating and cooling, because all of the heat during the day in the winter days gets stored in this massive mound of earth. And as the temperature changes and there's actually a colder temperature inside the room, it starts sucking all of that heat out from the walls back into the living space. And it actually acts as an automatic self-regulating, heater that turns on when the temperature reaches a certain low, and all of that heat that was stored during the day gets let out at night. So those earth tires and the big earth walls, the tires and the big earth walls are really very common with Earthships, and a lot of people have sort of taken that part because it's very useful and then adapted it to do different things. But as soon as you change a certain part of the design, it really doesn't function in the same way. Yes, welcome Anti-Commie Blood. Thank you very much for joining. We're talking about Earthships as one of the 5 pillars in the ecoVillage model. And so I actually heard of the Earthship a good few years ago. I can't remember exactly where it came to me, but I think it was sort of through YouTube. I was beginning to research all of these things, and I came across this brilliant idea, and I watched a documentary about him and all of the different elements, and it really blew my mind. And what I realized was that on an individual level, the Earthship really does seem to solve all of our basic needs of survival. And I say on an individual level because that really is sort of part of the story. And so when it comes to the ecoVillage model, if we're talking about collecting rainwater for all of our uses, creating energy, growing food, enough food to survive, managing our waste. The Earthship does all of that already. There's no need to actually look any further if those are the only things that you're looking at. But of course, when it comes to the ecoVillage model, and when I think of implementing this on a practical level, it really does require more than one household to supplement all of our needs, not just the sort of basic 5 for our individual survival. And so if we're talking about living this way, and in fact, maybe this is a good time to point a little bit of what the trouble that I have with the Earthship biotecture. Mike Reynolds set up an Earthship community in Taos, New Mexico. And so in this community, everyone builds their Earthship, obviously with all the peoples in the community, and everyone lives in an Earthship, and all of the Earthships are amazing. They're all very talented people, and they do everything they say they do. However, for me, the system is still very much based on the grid, which means that the whole community functions very normally through money. There's a certain amount that people pay to join. The ecoVillage runs around the business where they go travel around the world and build Earthships. And so it's obviously very important work. I'm not saying that that shouldn't be done, just that when I'm talking about the ecoVillage model, I am interested in a lot of other things as well. And that is also, for example, growing a food forest, which is not just a good way to grow all our food, but is actually beneficial to the environment and can help to improve the level of existence for all the organisms around. And in Taos, New Mexico, there seems to be much less of an attempt to really heal that earth with all these different techniques that we've been talking about in permaculture and with food forests. And it's very much focused on Earthships specifically, which again is fine because that's what they want to do. But when it came to me, I realized that the Earthship really had all of the answers when it comes to those basic needs and what's necessary, but that there's still more that needs to come with it. But having said all of that, I think there is a lot that we can learn from the Earthship and from Mike Reynolds. Now, I should say that I've never met Mike Reynolds personally. I've never spoken to him. I have met people who have met him. And I think as a lot of sort of geniuses and people who are ahead of their time, he seems to be a very, shall we say, unique individual. The way that he talks with people, the way that he socially interacts, he seems to have this kind of air that a lot of these, geniuses have, where they can't quite seem to click perfectly with the rest of humanity. Seems to be like almost a beat off. So again, I don't know this personally. This is the impression that I got from other people. But nevertheless, I don't think there's any need to try and emulate his behavior anyway. But certainly his life's work and his project is something that we can all learn a lot from. And with that, I will just mention that there's a documentary. There's been another one since, but the first documentary that was ever made about the Earthship was actually not just specifically about the building and what it entailed. The documentary is called Garbage Warrior. If you haven't watched it, it's a good watch. I'd recommend it. It's a good few years old now, but it's still worth watching. And it actually documents not only the development of the Earthship and their work now, but the process that they went through with trying to get the Earthship legalized, basically, trying to get the building permits that would allow them to build the Earthship legally and have it recognized. This is by, whatever the Architects Association or whatever it is. And so it's a very interesting film. Yeah, you've been recommended. Yeah, it's a fun watch. It's a very, I think, light-hearted film, as it were. You see him go through the process, but it's not a life and death situation. It's a man trying to get his dream to come true. So it's, with all of these documentaries out now about these serious issues, maybe it'll be a nice, fun view. And spoiler alert, it has a happy ending. So If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. I'll just talk more to the point about what I'm trying to take away from Mike Reynolds and his work. And that is that I'll give you a little bit of background in case you aren't aware of what's going on here in Portugal. And so we moved here in September, so I think nearly 6 months ago, in order to start working on this eco-village. And we bought some land about 1.5 years ago, and we have all of the plans laid out. And we sort of started the whole bureaucratic process of moving countries and a new place, etc., etc. And there's a lot going on, obviously. And eventually we came across our first major hurdle, which was the building permits for building a home. And our land is on a land that's designated as a high fire risk, which means you're basically not allowed to live there. This is a recent law in Portugal from 2017 following the recent fires. And it's a law that was really passed in haste to sort of show that they're doing something. The architect whom I spoke to and various other people have been very clear that this law doesn't actually do anything. It simply looks like they're doing something. And so this blanket law states that you can't build a home with legal permits on the land. However, you can be on the land, you can build any other buildings legally. You can set up a temporary home and live there for part of the time, as it were. And so having this categorization of fire risk doesn't actually reduce the fire risk in the area, and it doesn't seem to necessarily guarantee that people won't be there. It simply seems to be a sort of blanket statement that you can put on an area, and that shows that you've done what you can. So obviously when we heard this news, we were quite upset, taken aback, and we were thinking about what to do. And I remembered Mike Reynolds. And Mike Reynolds went on a long and arduous journey of trying to convince bureaucrats who really didn't know much about what he was talking about, why the Earthship was a good idea for everyone, why there wasn't actually a downside for someone to be hesitant about. And they had him go through so many tests, and the water people came and to show his levels and show the temperatures and, you know, go through all of these things and change the structures and do everything according to their code. And whenever he'd have these tests, they'd always show up as better than the current housing. And, you know, they're more durable with an earthquake, they're more fireproof, they conserve more water, etc., etc. And so it was a very frustrating process, I think, to see this going through, where you're meeting these people who believe something that isn't true and aren't giving you a chance to show them that that isn't the case. And so I really relate to Mike Reynolds and what he had to go through, obviously on a much, much smaller scale. We're not inventing anything new or planning on changing the world as of yet, but in order for us to get a permit to build on the land, we designed this fireproofing idea, which I'm quite proud of, and we've given it a lot of thought. We've had a lot of we've studied a lot about fireproofing areas, and we actually stayed in Coruna, which also get fires every year, and we saw firsthand sort of what it looks like and how you deal with it. So we've developed this plan for our land, which is not complex, easy to implement, but still very, very effective with minimal work and minimal cost. And the idea is that this plan is actually good for everyone. If, as we want, we can implement this plan on a large scale with many people changing the landscape of their homes to hold more water, to be more fire resistant, then this could actually impact Portugal and make a real difference and a real change. And so that's the thought that we're trying to go with when we're approaching this municipality. But at the end of the day, we are attempting to change a law that's in place now, and to sort of change it to something else. So that's always a very daunting task. And certainly in my experience, most of the people around me whom I've spoken to about this seem quite pessimistic about our chances. And that's why I wanted to talk about Mike Reynolds, because as I mentioned before, you can see in the film, Mike Reynolds has a very special way of approaching people. I think he has a bit of a short temper and he gets very frustrated, and he had to go and redo these things and do all of it because of the bureaucrats that he was facing. But because he would come with this attitude, he'd actually, turn them against him often, just because he wasn't very friendly and he'd be, a little bit tough to deal with. So it's interesting to see how he made that journey. And he actually mentioned a few years later, I can't remember where it was, but in one of the interviews he said that looking back, if he had to go through that process again, there was a lot that he would actually do differently. He felt that he had made some mistakes and things that had made it taken a lot longer than it could have if he'd, buttered up the system a bit more. So I'm just going to take a moment at the halfway mark to go over chat, because I see there are a few messages that I've missed. Let's have a look. Thank you for the links. Yes, Garbage Warrior, excellent. Oh, is this with the whole film on YouTube? Wow, amazing. So anyone who wants to. Rondon says, as a person who's been part of construction in places with lax or no building codes and places where building codes are crazy, I can attest those building codes only make contractors rich rather than make you safe. Yes, that seems to be the case all over. Somehow construction, I don't know why, maybe it's because it's something that's very basic that everyone needs. I don't know, but all over the world, it seems construction companies are automatically corrupt. They somehow have found a way that they have all of this power over people that for a building permit, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll pay as much as it takes. I'll change the building. I'll do whatever you ask. So that's interesting. Yeah, I agree, Rondon. And I think talking specifically about that, this is something that we actually mention in the book that we wrote, my wife and I believe, and I think Mike Reynolds says exactly this, that building your own home should be a basic human right. And that might sound a little extreme to some, but if you think about basic human rights, it seems that living and having a home is something that even animals get, and everyone should have a home that they call their own. And so if you can do it, we're not talking about, paying somebody else or getting the money to raise the funds, but supposing somebody had the knowledge to build a comfortable home out of, I don't know, tires and sand and a bit of wood, they should be allowed to do that. Now, I'm not saying that they should do it without building codes or doing it unsafely or anything like that. But the fact is that today, in order for someone to build their own house, well, legally, it's really impossible in certain countries. In Israel, where I used to live, you have to be both a qualified builder and sort of, you have to have a qualified engineer that goes over the plans, and each of these people you have to pay, and their rates can be quite high. So if you want to build, literally be the person who is, stacking the tires, or be the person who builds the house, it's actually very, very difficult to do that legally. They've separated the issue of building a house into so many different departments that need to give their okay, that it makes the process very, very bureaucratic, which is a real shame, I think. I think it could be much better if people felt that independence to be able to build their own home at 16. It'll be a one-room apartment, but that'll be a home that they built. They'd have to be pretty hardworking to get it done. They'd have to be pretty patient to do it right. Would develop, a lot of capabilities, and at the end of it, they'd have a home. So anyway, that's just my thoughts. But yes, I agree, Rondon. Let's see, Zidika Redirect, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The domes are the most used structure for Adobe and such. There is a specific design for being robust, and they are way more secure and long-lasting than bricks, etc. Absolutely. I want to say something regarding that comment because it's important to note. Whenever I'm talking to people about the Earthship or about other buildings we built, we fell in love with cob. We really want a cob house one day, or some cob structure. It's a magnificent building material all round, and Adobe bricks as well. Very similar but different styles. But this is what I say to anyone when I talk about natural building of any kind. I say, first of all, go and study the Earthship. Go and understand the Earthship, understand everything that it offers, all the different parts that it has, how it all works together, and then take whatever you want from that and implement it in your home. And really, the Earthship can be a lot more robust than it has to in certain climates. If your climate is comfortable enough, if you don't have too cold or too hot a weather or too much rain or not enough rain, then you could have a very simple design of the Earthship that would still do the same things. Or you could incorporate some of what the Earthship does into a different building style because it's a more comfortable. But nevertheless, I think anyone who is thinking of designing their own or thinking about natural building is well worth the while investing in studying about the Earthship model, everything that it entails, how it works, and then implementing whatever you want. That would be my personal recommendation. But nonetheless, yes. Anti-Commie Blood says building codes seem to actually make houses worse in some ways. Yes, I mean, building codes, and generally Mike Reynolds talks about this a lot. It's a very important subject that I think we don't give much thought to. Who designed our house? I mean, the house that I'm living in right now, we're not living in our land, we're living in a house near it in the town, which is so badly designed. I mean, I don't want to offend any builders who did it here, but I just cannot understand how people thought this design would be good. I won't even go into it. But most people, you know, designing a house with no windows or with one window. When I was a while back, before we'd actually moved to our house before last, we were looking for an apartment in the city in Jerusalem. And there were some one-bedroom apartments that we saw. We didn't have a large budget, and so there were certain criterias that were limiting, obviously. But some of the places really you couldn't call a home. I mean, you know, just 4 closed walls and, you know, concrete not painted, or, I mean, just really bad designs to begin with, never mind the upkeep. And so it's very sad to think about how many people live in a home which isn't designed for their own needs, which wasn't involved with them in any way. We feel very sentimental when we hear someone say that their great-grandfather built this home and it's gone through the generations. It's like, yeah, because that was something that was sort of tailored to that person, and you can usually tell it's a rather different design. These Lego blocks that you just put up 100 in a day and everyone's already the same, so it doesn't matter, you know. Very sad. Anyway, getting the government, Rondon says, getting the government involved equals less competition, equals more corruption with little recourse. That is true. This, yes, this system seems to be in one very specific direction. Lots of corruption in Manhattan. You can see videos on YouTube where they're allowed to say there's more footage in a building than there is. Wow, yeah. I mean, a lot of these things, well, throughout the history, and I think the mob has always been very much involved in different places. So, yeah, wow. Very, very sad to see the state today. But hopefully some places, Portugal among them and a few others obviously, are accepting natural building as a legitimate building form. And this is only thanks to people like Mike Reynolds and a lot of other people, obviously. I don't know the names of everyone, I'm ashamed to say, but lots of people in different places in different countries got cob buildings to be approved. And this was not even a joint effort. This was individuals who were going through this process, trying to get the laws in their specific area to accept it. And obviously the same with straw bale house or rammed earth or all these different types. A lot of very impressive and important individuals had to go through the long and arduous process of changing the laws in their area, but eventually they did it. And a lot of these people managed to do it. And today in many countries, you can legally build a natural building. Now, obviously, you still need to have various authorities sign off on it, and you have to, offer the plans before. And it's not like you can just go out into the woods and build a mud hut. Well, you could actually, but it wouldn't be legal. Sorry. And so the situation in the world certainly seems to be changing for the better, in that respect at least. But still, obviously, there's no difference in here. Although we can legally build a natural building, we can't legally build on the house, on our land because of the current laws. So there is still a certain way to go, definitely. However, and this is actually, I hope, how much have I got? 20 minutes, okay. So this, I hope, will lead us straight into the final subject that I wanted to talk about, which is how do we deal with this authority? What method can we find to successfully change laws and to successfully change the status quo, both bureaucratically and also, I think, equally important in people's minds, people's consciousness. If the people who you're trying to sort of, live with are against you, then that will cause a lot of problems as well. And there have been many, many eco-villages, I mean, not this model, but different communities that have been set up in lots of different rural areas. I think I've heard a lot of stories of England and America as well, but I'm sure in other places that came into this very quiet, very peaceful little town that sort of doesn't know the existence of tourists and set up shop, usually without talking to them beforehand because they didn't deem it necessary or whatever. And these little townspeople, they feel threatened, and they really don't want these strange hippies to start setting up camp on their backyard. And obviously, they turn to the authorities because that's who they turn to, and those people are really often doing something that is at least grey area in terms of the law. And that's when a lot of the problems start for these communities. And some communities manage to sort of work it out with the local areas. An example of this is actually the Boom Festival in Portugal. If you have never heard of it, the Boom Festival is a very, very big festival now that happens once every 2 years in central Portugal. But the rest of the year, or the rest of the 2 years, there's a large community of people who live on the land and work and have a whole community living together. In the beginning, and obviously the Boom Festival was a very large, loud techno festival, they had a lot of problems with the village that was very nearby, and for many years they had to deal with that issue. And now I'm happy to say, I think the last few years, I don't know much, I've never actually been, but this is all what I've heard and seen. They've managed to incorporate both the local community and be much more aware of their environment, culturally speaking, aware of Portugal. They're actually working on trying to promote more of the Portuguese culture in the event as a way to sort of bridge the gap between these two worlds. And so since they've done that, I think they've had much more success, both with the authorities being recognized legally and with the local people who have started to view them more as partners than just enemies. And for us here in the eco-village model, it's obviously very, very crucial that this idea, this project is beneficial to everyone. I sincerely believe there is no reason for anyone to lose out because of this project. maybe certain industries won't be making as much money, but certainly not to harm or hurt anyone in any way. And so this can be done by various ways involving the local community. We want to provide job opportunities for them to work, whether it's to impart their knowledge as local farmers, come and give workshops, whether it's to come and work on the eco-village in certain projects. And we obviously want to be legal, we want to be recognized by the authorities and to have their support, because ultimately this plan is really meant to help people. And when I talk about this plan, it involves every part of it, whether it's the Earthship specifically and disseminating this knowledge so that people who've never heard of it can know what their options are, all the way to starting a project that can boost production and the quality of living in the area, both in terms of the natural environment around and in terms of the people, the culture, having this sort of vibrant, more lively energy come and blow a little more life into everything. And so that's the general idea. That's what we hope to do. And I think that what can be learned from various people who've attempted to do this is that often when people come across the authorities, or when they come across having to get some sort of legal approval, they often feel very aggressive. And I can completely understand. In fact, it took me a good few years to let go of a lot of my anger, distrust, and hatred towards governments and in general these authority figures. Now, I should say very importantly that I don't trust them. I don't think that it's a good system. And if I could, I would wave a magic wand and have the whole system decentralized as soon as possible. Absolutely, without a doubt. But having said that, and as I have to keep reminding some of my friends, if we don't comply with the authorities to a certain degree, they literally can come and put us in a cage. And it's not even funny when you think about not paying your taxes, and this has happened to people, simply not recognizing the authority that they have, which a lot of my friends don't. If you refuse to pay the taxes, they can come and knock down your door and take you and cuff you and throw you in a cage. And so they demand a certain level of cooperation, whether we agree with it or not. If it gets to the situation where, you know, some people find they have to actually go to prison or because they won't comply with the government, then that's certainly a certain extreme. But let's say the general situation right now here in Portugal, I don't know where you are, I feel that it would be in my best interest to be able to work with the authorities than to try and take on the government. And so that's what I mean by trying to be less aggressive and less violent in our thinking about these authorities. Because make no mistake, my plan is most definitely to replace this current system with a much better one that is more beneficial to everyone. But I believe the crucial part of that is going to be the changeover. When that comes, if and when it comes, it can go, let's say, one of two ways. Either it can be very abrupt and probably very violent and chaotic, with a larger number of people suffering from it. Or, on the other hand, it could be a much smoother, slower transition where people are allowed much more time to get used to a new situation. And obviously, I think everyone would agree that the latter would be a better option for most people. And so the question becomes, how can we do this? How can we facilitate that? Well, I think the answer might be related to this global phenomenon that we're all, I think, experiencing these days, which is, of course, the coronavirus, and the way that both humanity has seemed to react to it and authorities. Now, I'm not going to talk about specific places, because I think that there are different places with different levels of, reaction to this and how they're all doing it. But generally speaking, there seems to be a global consensus on, isolating people, both in their homes and simply from each other. And in fact, gearing humanity towards a very, very different style of life. Now, I'm not being apocalyptic here, saying that this is something that's, I don't know what, but I think that when these things happen, it's very, very important to keep our eyes open and see how these things move forward, because it's often been the case that certain people, certain individuals try to take advantage of times like these. Don't forget that most dictatorships were started in times of chaos, not in simple times of calm peace. And there's a good reason for that. We see how people behave when they're panicking. And I think there's a level of panic which becomes chaotic, and then it becomes much more dangerous. But before that, you have this certain level of calm, controlled chaotic, which means that people are very, very frightened. They're into this sort of survival mode, thinking about what they need to do, but they trust the government and they do what they're told. They do it implicitly because they're so scared. So it's a very careful balancing act of how scared you can get people so that they're easier to control without pushing them too far until you've lost them. And so I'm not talking about, what specifically has happened. These are ideas that I'm sharing with you, but I would like everyone to think about what we would do in the case that, authorities and the governing bodies seem to be taking measures too far. And I know what my answer is. Now, I'm talking about these subjects because I've been thinking about this and trying to plan for it for a long, long time. In fact, it was very frustrating for me that now that we're so close and we have everything in place to start doing this, so that in 10 years, or in a few years at least, we'll be able to grow our own food, collect our own water, and then too soon before, this whole happened and the supermarkets are closed and goodness me, it's a whole mess. So it makes you think, but nonetheless, we are still preparing for this, and we have been for quite some time. Swoop, thanks for joining us. Oh dear, well, I hope you recover. And don't worry, just call it the flu. Then it just sounds a lot less dangerous. I've been thinking about what do I do when the water supply goes, when there's a solar flare that breaks all communication and electricity, when the authorities, implement a lockdown. What is our response when this happens? And this is really what I want to bring across as my personal message. I probably won't be one that a lot of people will agree with, but it's how I feel. And maybe we'll take an episode to talk a little bit about why that is. My personal view is that there's only one way to move forward, no matter what the crisis or the situation may be. And that is that it has to always be a peaceful method. Now, I say this because most of the people, I think, who are for decentralization, for liberty, have a very common notion that you need to fight fire with fire, that if the government is going to lock you up, then you have to defend yourself with your life if you have to. And I don't feel the same way, because I think that the authorities really thrive off of this violence and fighting back. If you go to a bureaucrat and try and shout at him to do what you want, notice how instantly he shuts down and just completely he stops talking to you, completely is blocking you out now because of that energy. That's how the authorities respond. When you're very peaceful, and I don't just mean passive, but I mean actual peacefully declining. So not being violent, not being aggressive, but not necessarily doing everything that you're told. It's much harder to deal with someone like that because people don't feel as legitimized to hurt that person. If you come at a police with, waving a bat or something, then he's going to defend himself. But if you stand completely still and don't respond when he comes at you, you're going to get hurt. But he'll feel much worse about, beating you up like that. And we've seen instances in history. I don't think that if you are a pacifist, then you won't get hurt ever. Absolutely not. But I do believe that pacifism is the way to go in order for us to enact change. Because if we go down the violent route, as so many seem to have done, it always seems to lead back to the same place. And that's what really frustrates me. So many of these, dictators or people who caused a lot of suffering were actually trying to help their people, at one time at least. They actually came around in order to get rid of the other guy who was abusing his power. And this cycle seems to repeat itself over and over. And if we get caught in that as well, I'm really scared that what will happen is that there will be a revolution, as there has been a few times before. People will be out in the streets, yelling to take down the government and the prime minister and destroy the statues. But after all of that chaos, after the whole thing is settled down, if there's no other system in place to change things, then the cycle will simply repeat. And I think the most effective way to stop that cycle is with peaceful and pacifist actions, meaning we're not accepting the situation, but there is no one to fight against. This is all about making it better for everyone. And so to speak specifically about the corona, I think, we'll see what will happen. I personally am not too worried about the illness, but I'm very confident in my immune system, so that's just the way I am. But it does trouble me to see how quickly people are falling in line when it comes to being locked in their houses and threatened with fines if they don't. And the coronavirus threat is something that's probably going to be around now for a while. So it will be interesting to see how reality recovers after this. But whatever it may be and whatever may be implemented, it's important for us always to remember that there is a way for us out of this that doesn't actually require anyone getting hurt. It does require a little anarchy. I agree with the meme. But yeah, let me actually go through chat a little bit because there's a lot that I've missed so far. And please feel well to any of you who are going through any of the symptoms. The flu is awful. You really do feel like you're going to die. It's if any of you have ever had it, it's not nice. Oh, nice. I'm memeing COVID. That's good. Let's see. But I've said now is the time to start your project in Portugal. Just start building. In all this chaos, the government will forget about those baloney laws. You know what? All joking aside, there is a good chance that the economy is going to crash at some point. Like, we could be witnessing the end of capitalism, the early stages of a complete global meltdown of survival systems. So, yeah, we could very well just start building. Just have to find a good food source from some friends around. We have water. It's, 2-hour hike, but we can get water. But yeah, start planting that garden. Seriously though, it's the best thing you could do right now, planting for the future. So yes, I'm hoping that we'll get to the point where we, those stupid laws aren't enacted anymore. For now, we'll see how it develops. Let's see. Anti-communist. I'm just going to stick with. I see. Anti-comment. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that you had changed your name. I couldn't understand these comments to Butron. So let's see. I think that's it from chat. Excellent. So we've got. Oh goodness me, we're almost close to the end. Thank you very much for joining, everyone. I hope you stay well. You have a good week ahead of you. I will be here next week as usual, unless, the internet breaks, but all things considered, we should carry on with another show. And I'm hoping in a couple of hours, Crimson Clad will be on with her show. So thank you very much to all of you in chat. If you would like the recording of this show, I'm going to upload it next week. I didn't upload an audio recording last week, so if you want that, hit me up. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good one, and I'll see you next week. Bye.